Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principle. I am Jethro Jones, your host. You can find me on all the social networks at Jethro Jones. Transformative Principle is a proud member of the B Podcast Network, where we produce the best educational podcasts out there. Today, I'm excited to have on the program Bryan Dean. He is CAS Innovation Specialist, and he's been working with hard-to-reach students with emotional impairments, conduct disorder, behavioral difficulties, and low interest for more than 20 years. He has experience designing professional learning around learner experience design, especially design instruction, universal design for learning, new teacher induction, design thinking, deep learning, and strategies for students in emotional dysregulation. So you know that he is like the perfect guest for this podcast because we talk about all those things all the time. And so in addition to that, he worked on longitudinal system implementation and designed organizational culture and climate change model. Climate/culture change models, not climate change models, right? And he developed a unique UDL coaching system based on appreciative and ontological coaching matrices. Bryan, welcome to Transformative Principle.
Is that me? Is that really me? That's what's written down.
I mean, that's what it says here. So
I know that's crazy. I will tell you, this is my usual. When they ask me for an intro, this is my usual intro, Jethro. When they ask me, I'm like, I'm into three things. I'm into hats, tats, and UDL. That's what it's about for me. I mean, you always see me in a hat. I've got a ton of tattoos, and I'm deeply, deeply entrenched in UDL and the movement of UDL.
Okay, well,
so maybe that's what I should write as a bio, because that makes me sound really, what you read. I appreciate you reading it. It makes me sound really impressive, but I'm pretty simple, dude.
All right. Well, we just figured out our show title: Hats, Tats, and UDL. That's what it's going to be, and people are going to be like, "What in the world is that?" And then that's all we're going to say about hats and tats, and the rest of this is going to be about UDL. So you're going to have to tune into another show for the hats and tats.
Right on. I'll come back on for a haberdashery episode. No problem, bro.
That sounds good. All right. Tell us a little bit about what CAST is and what UDL is. Just a brief overview. Most people probably have heard of it, but in case they haven't, tell us what CAST and UDL are.
CAST it's an educational research and professional development and learning organization. We're known for creating UDL. We're also known for giving UDL away for free. So, and most of the stuff that we do at CAST, we give away for free. If we build a product, it's usually through a grant, and we want people to use that. If we have professional learning, and it is like that is where we charge, but the professional learning will see you all the way through your implementation. We do work in workforce. We do work in design. We do work anywhere and everywhere. We're like MasterCard. We're everywhere you want to be, baby. You know what I mean? So, and we've been around for 40 years. And so that is wild to think about. Like, I remember hearing about CAST and hearing about UDL and thinking, oh, this must be kind of a new thing. And then I started checking into it, and it goes all the way back to the 80s. And then, right? Like, I was like, this is like, these things that they're saying are really progressive, and it's really like, like it's asset based, and this is really progressive pedagogy. And then I started looking into it, and I saw that it's been there since the 80s. And it's really about how do we build truly inclusive education, and not just inclusive in the sense of like just in the sense of, how do we get accessible materials to folks? Like, that is a big part of what CAST does. But the other side of it is, how do we explore what inclusion means? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to have an identity? What does it mean to be a learner?
Yeah.
Right. And to be a stakeholder in that.
Yeah. Good stuff. So we're gonna talk about a lot of those things deeper. Yeah. But what's the one big takeaway that you got from our conversation today?
My big takeaway is that education is about becoming human. It's about exploring being human, and the guidelines help us with that. And UDL is a force in realizing our humanity and how we're connected, and how we don't have to live in the silos that we have all created or continue to create. That we can we can explore other things and we can be many things, and it's up to us to help define that,
Yeah.
and it's up to educators to help scaffold that.
Yeah. My big light bulb is when you say, how do you go through school feeling unencumbered? What would that look like? And
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get to that and more here in just a moment. My interview with Bryan Dean. So, Bryan, I think a good place to start is to talk about this idea of the UDL 3.0 guidelines and why they're being updated. I mean, here's the thing, when we have something in education, we often think like, okay, they made it, they published it, it's a book, it's not a living document. So, talk to us about the 3.0 guidelines and what was the impetus to make some of these changes?
Right. So I think that the misconception, I'm glad that you brought it up, man. One of the big misconceptions is that once we publish something, that's it, it's done, right? And the guidelines, so CAST has been around for 40 years. This is actually our 40th year right now. So that's 4 decades of working within this framework of UDL, universally designing and searching for barriers and universally designing for students. And that is a complex ecosystem. Any classroom or learning environment is a complex ecosystem. And as such, it doesn't stay stagnant. And so the guidelines, CAST has always said that the guidelines are not a static thing. They're not published and then that's it. You can refer to them, because that doesn't evolve, and that doesn't become adaptive to your classroom and to your students that are coming in. And so the big impetus behind 3.0 was that the guidelines had focused for a long time, have always focused on learning barriers and barriers in the learning environment, but had not really focused on identity of students. And there's a growing body of research that shows that students need anybody that's learning anything. Let me take away students and say learners, and I mean learners as in everyone, you, me, people listening, everyone. They need to be able to change, and they need to be able to be in a system that allows them to change and find their identity. And identity is closely tied to how we navigate the world. And so UDL has always been human centric and not student centric. And I think I said that previously. Go
For a
ahead, brother.
second, just right there, because so much of our identity right now is defined by these very limited aspects of our lives, our sexual
Mm-hmm.
orientation or our gender or our race. And one of the thing that one of the things that frustrates me about a lot of those narrow definitions is that people are so much more than that. It's not about
Right
whether
on.
or not you are black or white or whether you are a man or a woman or whatever it is. It's about so much more. You as a
Yeah.
person are so much more than that one narrow definition. And it literally breaks my heart when I hear people limit themselves to this one narrow thing, and I
Yeah.
just want to share briefly about this, that for a long time I thought that my identity was that I was a school principal, and when that
Mm-hmm.
was taken away from me in a heartbeat, I had to go back and remember who I was and what really mattered, and that I was so much more than that one narrow thing that I
Right.
identified myself as. And that was important. How does, when you say identity is important in these 3.0 guidelines, how does that incorporate the whole identity and not just this narrowly focused hot topic left versus right kind of thing that everybody is so focused on right now? We really need to move past.
Yeah. No, I think actually that's a great question, and a great, kind of great lead in. So I think that in order for us to navigate our world, it needs to grow and shrink, right? And we need to be able to understand that. And there are different seasons in our life. And I love this. I love the thing that you said, Jethro, when you were like, "Look, we're not defined by these small things," because that's really more adapted, isn't it? Right? Like I am adapted to being this, or I'm adapted to being that. It's not adaptive. It doesn't grow and change. It starts to become silos, even within our own construct of who we are, who Bryan Dean is. There shouldn't be silos that exist within that, right? Like I should be able to move amongst all these things pretty fluidly in thinking, in adjusting my worldview. And so the guidelines, like just down from the language that we've started to use. So before in the guidelines, we had provide options for provide options for this, provide options for that, right? Now we've changed just the heading of that to design options for. So, and we've changed some of those other headings. So, like designing options for welcoming interests and identities. Right there in the beginning, that is on the access line of the new guidelines. It's right on the access. And I think it's really incredibly important that it's put there because access to learning and how we learn is far bigger than just is it a book on tape, is there text to speech. Those things are incredibly important. I'm not taking away from those, and a lot of cast bread and butters around that, right? Like we exist as an organization to help with that accessibility. But what happens if we take accessibility a couple steps forward into the future? And now, how do I access it as a guy from Detroit that is living in this world, right? I got to be honest with you. Stuff like Catcher in the Rye is real hard for me, and it was hard for my students. I worked 17 years in juvenile corrections. Things like Catcher in the Rye, which is a book that is still taught in our schools and still mandatory reading, did not hold a lot of interest from my students
Yeah.
who had been who had been incarcerated, and it didn't hold a lot of interest from me either. I couldn't see myself in it. And so right away, we're saying, how do we build an engagement? How do we build an environment that is welcoming, like invites people in of all types, and then also immediately right away addresses their identity? And then, on top of that, there's language within the guidelines themselves around like what we've changed. We've changed some of the headings. So, like designing options for sustaining effort and persistence is still there. For language, designing options for language and symbols is still there. But one of the big changes is designing options for emotional capacity. And within that, it's recognizing expectations, beliefs, and motivations. It's developing awareness and of self and others. It's promoting individual and collective reflections and cultivating empathy and restorative practices. Right there, that is a huge departure. It's still the same stuff. Like actually, if you look at it in comparison side by side, the wording is different, but the intent of the guidelines stays the same. But now we've added the language, we've used the language to be more articulate in that, and to really give a permission that was never really fully voiced, but was always there.
Yeah.
And so just it's like from its very structure, especially in engagement, the folks that have been on the crew to look at the guidelines, they've been very intentional in their language and in their verbiage, and I think that's important. And for the first time, like these guidelines we've brought in a student stakeholder group to kind of bring student voice to it, have them review it, take a look at it, say, does this fit? Does this work? What's this mean as a learner? What's this mean to you? Right? Because we want to make it learner accessible. We want to make it teacher accessible. We want to make it administrator accessible. We want to make it human accessible, right? UDL as a way for you to navigate and understand your learning throughout the world, throughout your life is massive. And that's kind of like the secret sauce
Yeah.
of UDL.
Well,
It's like it's the residual, right? Like it's not something it's like trying to catch water.
yeah.
You can feel it in your hands, it's there. You can't really describe it. It's really how you develop your schema to move throughout the world.
Yeah. And so, like, one of the things that I thought when I first learned about UDL a little bit more than a decade ago, I think is when I first got introduced to it. There are two things that I want to point out. Number one, I didn't go to any professional development to learn how to do UDL because the guidelines were clear enough that I could say, okay, I get what this means. And
Right on.
and so, number one, I really appreciate the idea of how it's about designing rather than just provide options for. And like
Yes, sir.
that one phrase of designing is it also invites the students to participate as well,
Yes.
because it's not like here's one of my big frustrations in education is that we think that the teacher is the source of everything, and that is not and does not have to be the case. And yet
Right.
schools are designed around this idea of the teacher being the source of all information and all expectations and everything.
Yeah.
And the thing that I talk about all the time is that nobody cares about your learning except for you as the learner. And this applies
Mm-hmm.
to kindergarten all the way up through people who are working on their doctorate to
Yep.
people who are done learning formally and are learning for their jobs or for their own interests. Nobody cares except for you. And in
Right.
schools, the only way that we care is that you are compliant and doing the things we want you to. But when you leave our class, like you leave our class, and it's
Yeah.
not my responsibility as the teacher for you to learn. And it is always your responsibility as the learner to learn, whatever that looks like. And so,
Right.
so that has to be like at the very beginning. And so I really appreciate that idea of design instead of provide options for, because it makes it so much more like inviting of other of the students or somebody else
Yeah.
to be involved in that
Yeah, for
conversation,
sure.
right?
Right. And I think that's a huge part. Like these guidelines, while the guidelines have always emphasized co-design, I think these guidelines start to explicitly say how are we co-designing with our with the learners in front of us or the learners around us. And let's be honest, as we cling to that old kind of like Prussian like factory type of education where teachers give knowledge and you are supposed to receive knowledge, as we do that, we create a system where students are either benefactors because they can understand the game of school and they can benefit from it, or victims of education. And really, is that what we want? We want some kids to be benefactors, and we want the majority of kids to start feeling like they're victims of education. More and more, we know that students, when they report like how what's your well-being at school, not even just how safe are you, but like what's your overall well-being of school? Do you like school? Those sorts of things. We're getting younger and younger students are saying, I don't feel like I belong here, and I don't feel like I can be me here, and I don't feel like I understand this,
Yeah.
right? And so that we're getting more victims of education at a younger rate. Now, I want to be clear in saying I don't feel that that's the human entities, the human entity within education. I think that that is something that happens over a system,
Yes.
right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
and UDL is there to disrupt that system
Yeah.
and say, you should feel, as a kindergartner, you should feel really great in your classroom,
Yeah.
right? Like I remember asking my daughter, and my daughter's kind of a spitfire. She's 19 now, but she's kind of a spitfire, brother. And I asked her when she was going into kindergarten. I said, Ev, how do you think it's gonna go? How do you gonna? Are you worried about finding friends or anything like that? And she's like, no, Dad. Wait till they get a load of me. They're gonna love me. And I was like, dope, right? Like to me, that's the dopest answer that she
Yeah.
could ever put out. But then I asked her again in sixth grade. And in sixth grade, she says, I don't know, I'm struggling a little bit. And she's a smart kid. She has some learning barriers that she has to get over. She's pretty severe ADHD. And all of a sudden, by sixth grade, she was starting to feel like she wasn't a good student. But yet, this is a kid that's learning on their own. And prior to her going through that system, not the people, not the teachers, not the people around her, but that system of stagnatory kind of education, that's and siloed education, she started to feel like she wasn't a good student anymore,
Hmm.
right? And that breaks my heart, right? And because she's lucky she's got a dad that's in UDL, right? So I'm like, no, like we can figure out this way. You learn this way. Like let's work on this together. But a lot of people don't, right? And so they go through that period and they think that they're not a good student, or they're not smart, or they're not any of the things that they equate to it. And it's really not that. That's a system, and we're challenging that.
Yeah.
And I think teachers want to challenge that.
Well,
You
I
know,
think so too. And when they have the opportunity to challenge that and really connect with the kid and help that kid see that they have value in and of themselves by virtue of the fact
yeah,
that they are a human being, then yeah, that is really powerful. And like there's this crazy notion that a good student looks like whatever a good student looks like.
yes, right,
And the reality is that when you try to define what the perfect student looks like, you end up describing nobody at all, because nobody is
exactly.
really like that. And so regardless of whatever, like I don't even want to call them issues or learning challenges, regardless of whatever life experiences you have that make up who you are as a person, your identity, those are going
Mhm.
to influence how you do in the game of school, but they also influence how you do in the game of life. And to this conversation, I was talking with a friend this weekend, and he said, he's like 35, 37 years old. And he said, Jethro, I just feel like I'm so behind all my peers who are at whatever level. And I was like,
Yeah,
dude, it is impossible for you to be behind. You are,
Right? There's no race.
yes,
There's no
you,
race.
you're right where you personally need to be. You're right where your life has led you to be. And if
Right.
somebody else had the exact same things in their life that led them to where they're at, they could be right where you're at if they had the exact same life, but they would most likely have a different life because we all do, and that is okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was just like bummed that he felt like he was behind, and really, there's no such thing. It's not possible.
Right. And I would challenge the people out there in the audience. I would challenge most people. Like, do you feel behind? That's a great question to ask, because I would dare say that there's a vast majority of us that feel like we are not where we should be. And I don't understand that, right? Like, because there's no race anymore. And actually, that was one of the most freeing things for me. I was not a good student because I was not a system, like I was not a play by the rules kind of cat. You know what I mean? And so, like, I became a stigmatized learner, right? I was a bit rambunctious, and I'll be honest with you, I call myself a positive deviant now.
Mhm.
I was a deviant before I was positive. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So, like, I got in trouble. I did the things that people do to get in trouble. But once I got out of that and I realized there was no race, man, I felt free. I felt, no, you know what? Even better, I felt unencumbered.
Yes, that's great.
Is what I felt, and I think that, what if I could have gone through school feeling unencumbered?
Yeah.
One of the very key critical things of UDL is, what if we just imagined that the barriers aren't in the student, they're in the curriculum and in the environment. And if I would have known that when I was a learner, things may have been different. They may not have been, and I might have still been a knucklehead and whatnot, but I would have felt like I had some room, right? I would have felt unencumbered in schools, and I think that's really what we want all learners to do, is feel unencumbered throughout their lives, right? Like, there's challenges, and I have to get over those challenges, but there's a difference between a challenge and being weighed down,
Yes,
right?
totally.
And I think the new guidelines act as a way for us to recognize places that we can design in where any learner can feel like they belong, and like they have their own autonomy within it.
Yeah.
And that could be bounded autonomy, but they have their own autonomy to explore,
Yeah.
right?
So that brings me to another question about the
Yeah.
guidelines, which is the phrase
Yeah.
expert learners. Has that been changed?
We're kind of looking at it, and that concept has always felt static, right?
Yeah.
And so now that is being challenged and being asked, is what is it really expert learning, or is it a continuum of learning, or is it more like these are executive functioning pieces?
Yeah.
And why wouldn't we just call out executive functioning and let learners who are engaging, right, let them learn about executive functioning? I know my life would be vastly different had I known about executive functioning and being able to pick those pieces out and say, this is where I'm strong and this is where I need work, like real skills work.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be vastly different.
Yeah. So
So
one resource that I
go
would
ahead.
suggest that you and people who are listening take a look at is James Anderson, who's writing about learnership and
Mm-hmm.
how his book called Learnership. I had him on the show a couple months ago, and his approach to it is really good because expert learners feels like a finished state
Right.
that you should
Right.
strive to achieve, and then at this point you will be an expert learner.
Right.
However, I don't think that it is finished, and in different situations I am an expert learner. In other situations I'm a very passive learner, and in other situations I'm not even interested in learning. I just want somebody else to do it
Right.
for me, and it's okay to be in those, a different person in those different situations. And that's again where this identity comes in. And like, as a real concrete example, doing things with my mind or interacting with technology, I am really good at, and I can handle
Yeah.
it, and I can problem solve and figure out why things aren't working with technology. But when it comes to mechanical things, it's overwhelming. I don't understand it. It's difficult. And like, my car was making some noise the other day, and I was like, I'm taking this in. I have no idea what's going on. My buddy down the street, he's got his motorcycle in his garage, like all pulled apart because he's fixing it because he it's not working, and so he wants to fix it and make it
Right.
better. I would never in my life do that. I don't have any desire to.
Right.
I have no interest in it. I don't feel like I have the aptitude to do it. And so some people, especially in the education system, if that's what we were focused on, would say, well, you're dumb or you can't do this or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Right.
And you know what? I know I could learn it if I really wanted to, but I don't want to either. Like that's just not
And that's okay, right?
exactly.
That's okay. And we have never really said that in education. We've never said to students in fifth grade, well, it's okay that you don't really, that this isn't your vibe,
Yeah.
right? Like this isn't your thing. We still need to have rigor, right? Like nobody's saying give everybody full autonomy to do whatever they want. That's how we end up with like that's how we end up with Lord of the Flies, right? So we give bounded autonomy, and we might bind that autonomy around like task or time or place or a couple other things, right? Technique, right? But we still want to give some autonomy. Now you may not want to. You may not want to learn how to fix your car, right? But your expertise in technology is just as valid as that expertise and genius and expert learner that can fix a car. There is something genius about being a plumber, being able to reach behind a wall and feel the pipes of a wall and know where a clog is. There's something really brilliant about that, and you are an expert in that,
Yeah.
right? Because I can't do it, right? But there's also something really great about being able to build a digital learning environment where students can access information anytime they want. That's something just as brilliant,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so now it's not just what are our likes and dislikes, because we can't base everything on what we like to do and what we dislike to do, but it is how do so I may not know this, but how do I attach the things that I do like and the way that I do like to learn and the way that I know I take in information? How do I attach this to this new task?
Mhm.
And this task may be a task that I have to take and I have to do, but at least now I can figure out what the autonomy I have is. Is it autonomy over technique, or maybe time, or where I do it, or whatever, right? But it recognizes that there's all sorts of ways for us to learn and all sorts of ways for us to showcase that knowledge and be experts in our knowledge,
Yeah.
right? And still be okay with saying, I don't know everything, right? And maybe I don't want to know everything about this. Maybe it's not my thing.
Yeah. And
So I think that's choice and voice,
totally. And
as the old saying is.
and those things are so essential. And so like going back to your example of Catcher in the Rye for
Mm-hmm.
incarcerated youth, like yeah, that may not totally get them. And it's okay to say, I know you don't like or you're not feeling this thing right now. And so then the conversation becomes, are we going to push through and do it anyway because this is something that's valuable for us, or are we going to find another way that meets the same goals that we're trying to have? For example, we want to read great literature, and so like for me as an English teacher, I was like, I don't really care what book you read, and in fact, if
Right.
everybody's reading their own book and we're having conversations about themes and about morals and like what we're learning from this, and everybody's pulling in these different examples from their own books and saying how your example from Catcher in the Rye matches with my example from The Last Green Valley, and how those two books can teach me the same thing. Like that's way more valuable. The synthesizing the connections,
Absolutely.
that's way more valuable than everybody reading the same text and coming to the same
Right.
conclusion.
Right. It's more valuable from an educational standpoint, and it's more valuable from a human standpoint,
Exactly.
right? Because now I realize that Catcher in the Rye, there's a level of the story, right? That is the mechanics of the story. It tells me about this kid named Holden he goes to a private school, he got kicked out, and he doesn't feel. But here's the thing: I understand feeling lonely. I understand feeling isolated, right? And so now I can bring that larger theme, right? And I can say, that book doesn't work for me to call that out, or my lived experiences don't exist in that book or identify with that book, but they do identify here. And wait a minute, all of a sudden, like if everybody has their own book, right? Now we know that like this is a human theme, which is far bigger than just saying this is a theme in a book that somebody wrote in 1956, right?
Yeah.
Like this is bigger than that. So, and I think that to me is like one of those. That's what this starts to open up, and that's where it challenges us as educators. That's where it challenges us and says, look, what are your assumptions of learning, and what are your assumptions of student knowledge, and their fonts of knowledge, like and their funds of knowledge, and how are you sticking with the same thing that you've always stuck with, or are you challenging that?
Yeah. Man, deep stuff. This is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it really is. But that's the other side of it, right? Like, so the depth of the pool of UDL is super deep, right? but you can wade into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the idea of accessibility. Like once I get there, I notice that this thing is very deep and it can feel overwhelming. But like Joy Zabala said, and it was one of my favorite things that she ever said. She said, "You can't boil the ocean, and you can't." So we have to build the guidelines, and we have to build this idea of universal design and co-designing and barrier disrupting. We have to build it so that it's easy enough for everybody to onboard to, and then realize its depth, and then you chase that depth wherever you need it, wherever you want it to go.
Yeah, which is the beauty of a good model. Like I said, I've never done any professional development around UDL myself, except like I've never attended any classes, but I have interviewed people, listened to podcasts, read books, that kind of stuff, and I've adapted it to what I needed and used that to help me teach it to other people and help them understand.
Right.
And that's the beauty, is that it's accessible in and of itself, and then it makes things accessible for others. So speaking of teaching, let's talk about UDL
Yes.
Con, which is the
Right on, brother.
40th anniversary of UDL, like or of CAS. What is UDL Con, and why should people go to it?
Yeah, so the name is UDL Con for a reason, right? So I want you to think of like Comic Con. I want you to think of an event, right? An experience, right? So that's kind of like when we started designing the idea and coming up with the idea, like that was one thing that really stuck out. Like just coming to a conference is it's not enough, right? And it's kind of like we were talking about UDL. Like how do you know that it exists there? It's sometimes like catching water, right? Like you can feel it in your hand and you know it's there, but it's real hard to describe. Something like the idea of cool, just the idea of something being cool. You can't really tell me why it's cool, but it's a vibe that you catch. It's a feeling that you catch. It's something that is all encompassing. So when we looked at UDL Con, we were like, how do we bring a premier event and experience to the UDL community? And so we've had the CAST Symposium, which was brilliant and beautiful, and like had great speakers and great topics and threads. And we had UDL IRN Summit, which had a ton of threads, but had a ton of people come to it. And so like those two kind of combined. And then we said, it's not about them combining, it's about a new experience that exists. So UDL Con is that new experience. And it is, I am pushing, when I talk about it, I am pushing that it is an experience. When you dial into UDL Con, like it's encompassing, and there's plenty of it envelops all the paradoxes of space, and one of those being that you can be with your community and you can be by yourself. So sometimes it can be overwhelming, and you need spaces where you can go and you can just like be by yourself, right? And kind of synthesize the information you've taken in, put it to your own stuff, right? And say, okay, that makes sense. I've digested that. Give me some more. And sometimes you want to be in the thick of it with everybody else and catching that feeling, that good feeling, deep down in the cockles of your UDL practitioner. So the con, it does that. It's an international con. We've got like 135 some odd different sessions. We've got international sessions. We've created a hybrid system. So there is a virtual portion of the conference, which is, some people pre-record their stuff, and then we have some asynchronous talks that are going on in the live space that will also incorporate into our video or our online platform. So you can buy virtual tickets and attend the virtual. You can buy in-person tickets; those are limited, and we're going to have about 400 people at this new con. And in both cases, you're still experiencing with people. You're still experiencing UDL events and networking opportunities, talking to and just getting down and talking with the people that are into the same thing and facing the same issues as you. I've always said that I love UDL events because the community is so warm and welcoming, and like it's like coming to UDL summer camp,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Like you see the people that you used to know and you meet some new people and they're like, it's great to see you. And like that is what the con is meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have everything from AI to classroom, talking about classroom community. We have accessibility webinar like demos, and we have accessibility sessions. Like how even as simple as like how do I make my PDF accessible?
Yeah.
Which is still difficult, right?
It
Like
is.
people still need to know that stuff. So we've put together as much as we can and tried to hit as many levels so that you can get real deep, or like I said before, you can start dipping your toe in and saying there's a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you can find your own niche. You can say, I don't want to go down the track that I usually go down. I want to go down this. I want to figure out AI and UDL and what does that mean, or I want to figure out like what are great thinking routines for my students that help them with identity, but also help scaffold their thinking into analytical thought. Like we have so many great sessions at the con, so I'm super stoked.
Yeah.
We're going to be releasing the guidelines there, so that's our big push. Is we'll release the guidelines there to the public, and then we are right now dedicated to revamping some of our current resources and building some new resources that will help with that at the con. It's the largest UDL event of the year.
Yeah. That's
And
awesome.
so we're going to blow the roof off, man. We have, I got to tell you, man. Oh, shoot, Jethro, someone's going to yell at me if I don't say this, brother. We've got two killer keynotes. We got Paula Clough and we have Mirko Chardin. And if you've checked them out
Yeah.
before, then you know who they are. And if you don't, you better ask somebody. You better get on YouTube and find them because they are electric.
Yeah.
And they will put the fire in your belly.
For sure.
Like that's the whole idea is you walk away and you want to be like Judd Nelson at the end of Breakfast Club.
That's
You
right.
throw up your hand and you're like, this is it. This is the moment, right?
Yeah. That's good.
So that's the event that we're going for, and I think that we'll meet that, and then we'll just keep on building on it.
Well, and the thing that makes the experience so good for things like Comic-Con and in really good conferences that are experiences is the community around it. And so that's the key is the other people that are there virtually or in person. And I've done many
Yeah.
virtual experiences, virtual conferences over the years
Mm-hmm.
and led many of them. And they can be very powerful experiences, even if you're not there in person, but especially if you are there in person, there's some real power there. So
And we've cultivated events that are both in person and then strictly in person. And then we've cultivated events that are strictly virtual. And then we've cultivated events that are both.
yeah,
Right. So you can find your place, right? Like that's what it's all about. It's about finding your place, getting in where you fit in
yeah,
and figuring out where you fit in. And I think that UDL Con is going to be the best expression of that CAST has put out.
yeah. So I've got links to that at transformativeprinciple.org.
Yes,
Just
sir.
tap on the title of this episode or the album artwork, and you'll go to the page where it has links to the UDL Guidelines 3.0 and the UDL Con. Anywhere else we should direct people to, Bryan?
Yeah. I mean, if you go to cast.org, you'll find both of those things plus a ton of other resources and our the other projects and products that we have. Like sometimes CAST is forgotten that it is a research firm. There is a research side of our R&D. We have great PL, we have great workforce, we have great design, and we have really great research and development. So like we have created a ton of products at CAST, and those products still remain, and they remain free. So if you go to cast.org, you can find the projects that we're currently working on, and if you want to research with us, there are plenty of opportunities to do so. And then you can find the UDL Con, you can find the new guidelines, you can find our products and direct to our products and how they might be used in your classroom. Like we've done some really incredible stuff. Like it's all there at cast.org.
Yeah, good stuff. So last question, Bryan.
Yes,
What
sir.
is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative leader? Like you've talked about a lot of stuff. What's the one action step that people need to take?
Well, that's a tough one, right? Like, how do you become transformative instead of transactional? And
Uh,
how do you? I would say if you're just starting, if you're beginning, I'm a big fan of Ghostwalks in my school. So I was a principal for a small time, and one of the favorite things I did was I get to my school early, and I would walk to school, and I would stay at my school late, and I'd walk to school, and I would walk without anybody in it at first because not because I'm looking for problems, right? I'm not looking for a burst water line, although I have to look for
yeah,
those things, but I'm also looking at what is being said by the stuff that's on the walls and in the classrooms, right? What story is that telling, and whose story is it, and who's telling that story, and then the obvious question of who's not telling that story and how do we build those out. And so a ghost walk I think is great. And then the other thing I would suggest is getting out and being a principal that is seen, is visible. And I mean it's hard being a principal, right? Because 100% of the issues that walk into your room, into your office, have to be taken care of. And that might only be 10% for most of the other
yeah,
teachers, but it's 100% of yours.
yeah,
And it's hard to get out from behind that desk. But by walking you're building your culture, and you're becoming a leader of that culture, and a shepherd of that culture. And I think that's our big role, is to be shepherds, not just authorities, but be shepherds of our community, and push that forward. So that's what I would say
That's good.
off the top of my head.
Well, I'm gonna say I love the ghost walk idea because one of the things that I've talked about a lot is having action pictures of your students doing cool things and hanging them up all around your school. And
Yeah,
like taking, 8 by 10, 11 by 14, printing those out, putting them in frames of kids doing cool stuff, and then swapping them out on a regular basis so that kids
yeah,
see themselves doing cool things up on the walls. Not with like just your phone camera, but like get a DSLR so that it looks high quality.
hmm,
Get some people with some skills in there taking some
right,
pictures. That kind of stuff is incredibly powerful and
yeah.
not that expensive for giving kids this cool
For what
experience.
and what you're building. And here's the other thing. I love it when so I would suggest, like, when students were having a hard time with a certain rule or something, like in elementary school or even in high school, right? I would take pictures of students doing that rule, right? Following that thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's us. That's what we do in this school, right? And it's not about look who's being good. It's about these are people that you recognize and you see, and this is us. This is ours, as opposed to this is mine and I'm letting you into it. This is ours and we create it.
Very powerful. Bryan, thank you so much for being part of the Transformative Principle today. This was awesome.
I appreciate it, man. I really enjoyed the conversation, man. So I dig it.